Welcome in, everyone, to our Cracked Racquets 2020 U.S. Open men's singles recap. What a fantastic 3 weeks in New York we just saw. Obviously, so much outstanding tennis, so many dramatic finishes, none more so than our final here for this U.S. Open. Dominic Thiem coming back from 2-0 down, first time since 1949 that's happened at the U.S. Open. He does so to capture his first major title of his career over Alex Zverev. Joining me to break down that match, give our preliminary thoughts, to recap this U.S. Open. You, of course, know him as our Cracked Racquets Do Everything, a former Denison men's tennis great, the only undefeated high school tennis coach in Missouri State history, James Foster McDonald. Jamie, it's a day later. I'm still hungover. How are you feeling about this U.S. Open?
Very hungover as well. Man, that took a lot out of me. It was stressful. It was very frustrating at times. So yeah, glad that it's over, but even more glad that we get to sit here and talk about it now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we're going to be doing today, again, recapping the final, we'll talk about, did the best player win? Should this tournament have an asterisk next to it? Of course, we're also going to talk about the quality of play and what we thought about a U.S. Open with no fans, how that played a factor. Now, if you want to hear a more extensive breakdown on the men's final, go check out Monday's Mini Break podcast. You want to hear a more extensive breakdown on both the men's and women's action we saw in New York, go check out the Great Shot podcast I did with Matt Stakowiak. And of course, if you want to hear our thoughts on the women's draw, you can find that video on our YouTube channel as well. But Jamie, let's start with this men's final. Dominic Thiem, 2-6, 4-6, 6-4, 6-3, 7-6 victory over Alex Zverev. Your thoughts on his win on this match?
Listen, it was a good win, but a poor match overall. That's what I have to say. And you don't want to bash on anyone too much, especially someone who's a Grand Slam champion for the first time, right? But listen, you mentioned it, the level of play in this match just a bit disappointing, both from Dominic Thiem and Alex Zverev. Of course, it had its ebbs and flows, many momentum switches, and at the end of the day, it was the last man standing, and that was Dominic Thiem. But a bit disappointing, especially from the start. It just felt a bit off. And listen, here we are. I'm disappointed, but at the same time, who am I to judge?
Well, Jamie, I'm a fan of poetry, and I just think the poetry of this moment met the occasion. It's been such a struggle for all of these players to break through in the era of the Big Three, the Big Four. We haven't had a first-time Grand Slam champion in the ATP game since Marin Cilic did it in the 2014 U.S. Open, and so it was fitting, in my mind, to see both of these players clearly struggling to get over the hump, get over the finish line in this match. Now, of course, there were pockets of brilliance for Alex Zverev, who will always hold a spot near and dear in my heart. The fact that he won 92% of his first serve points in that first set, went 7 of 8. The fact that he won 86% of his first serve points in that second set, went 15 of 20 at the net. He came out so aggressive, had such a smart game plan. And yes, part of his success was due to Thiem's poor level of play, but it was so encouraging to see Alex Zverev race out to that lead, and yet you knew the jitters were going to come. They certainly did at the end of that third set. Gamesmanship from Thiem, as he's down 3-4 in the third. He sends 3 rackets to his team to go get restrung, indicating, hey, he's here for the long haul. But ultimately, why do you think Thiem was able to flip the script in this one, Jamie?
You don't want to take credit away from Thiem because he did a great job of digging in when he needed to. But, unfortunately, this thing was on Zverev's racket. He had the chance to close this out in the third, gave up, some sloppy breaks. He had the chance to pull this thing together. He was serving for the match in the fifth. And so, yeah, you can turn and say, yeah, phenomenal job of Thiem for hanging in there and just, staying on the court quite literally. But it was Alex Zverev's match to lose, and that he did. And unfortunate to see that sort of crumble. I know, obviously, as you mentioned, we go into depth about this, but, the very things that we worry about with Zverev and that people have been talking about, right? Crumbling in the big moments, whether it be the serve, whether it just mentally taking off and being very passive. I mean, if you compare that tennis in the fifth set that Alex Zverev was playing to what he did when he started this match, and again, that's not fair because they had just been on court for 4 hours and there was so much going on, but I mean, it is just a stark night and day comparison. That is just a different Alex Zverev. And so unfortunate to see him go out that way. But at the end of the day, he played a really, really tough match, and Dominic Thiem just a bit sharper mentally in the fifth.
Yeah, I think for Alex Zverev, 92% of his first serve points were in the first set, 53% in the fifth set. That's pretty indicative of how his level dropped. And look, he continued to move forward. I thought something so encouraging was how well he was striking the forehand in this match. Really absorbed everything Thiem tried to do and was able to dish out some pace as well. And he had his most success when moving forward, but you could just tell he got tentative. He started, just sort of cozying in or babying those first volleys, giving Thiem second looks at passes. And Dominic Thiem, too good physically, too mentally tough of a player. If you give him 2 looks at a passing shot, he's going to take advantage. And so that kind of gets us to, did the correct player win this match? Did the best guy win? It's hard to say no, right? Given Dominic Thiem was the person able to struggle but get over the finish line. Zverev, if he wanted to get over the finish line, this match was there for the taking. As you mentioned, he served for the set at 5-3, was firing in 68 mile per hour second serves and 72 mile per hour first serves in that fifth set. Hard to say the wrong player won this match, but in your opinion, do you think the right player won it?
It's tough. When you look at this match just individually, it's kind of hard to say yes, just like you mentioned, because Zverev showed such a high level at the beginning, because Dominic Thiem came out super flat. If you ask that question toward the beginning in the first couple hours, it's Alex Zverev who absolutely should have won this match. Now, the fact that Thiem hangs in there, the fact that Zverev kind of goes away, even if you start to add a little bit of context around this U.S. Open, Dominic Thiem just came off of a straight set win over Daniil Medvedev, some guy who's been an absolute force on hard courts, particularly at the U.S. Open as well with his run last year. So you start adding all those things in, you start thinking more and more, well, Thiem really probably was the one to deserve this title. And especially when Djokovic went out after he was defaulted against Carreño Busta, everyone was pointing to Dominic Thiem. And I think that's an important factor in this match too, right? Thiem was the favorite, and so that for sure weighed on him in this one. But from what I saw, I think the correct player won this tournament, given the players not in the draw and then also Djokovic losing early.
No, I agree with you. And look, for Dominic Thiem, he becomes the first man born in the 1990s to win a Grand Slam title. He becomes the 5th player in the Open era to be able to come back from 2 sets to love down to win a Grand Slam. As I mentioned, the first to do it in the Open era at the U.S. Open, the first to do it since Gaudio did it at the 2004 French Open. But he deserves an enormous amount of credit for just sticking around physically, for staying alive. I agree with you. You look at his body of work up to this final, had only dropped the 1 set to Cilic and had looked so impressive throughout his run here. I agree with you. I do think the best player won this event. I think this match was on Zverev's racket. I think he very much could and probably should have won this one, and he'll be kicking himself. But ultimately, all of the credit in the world goes to Dominic Thiem, who gets over the hump. He had made the finals of the Australian Open, had 2 finals of the French Open in his past, had 1 at Indian Wells, made the finals of last year's year-end championship event. It felt like it was a long time coming for Dominic Thiem, and so he deserves loads of credit. And with that history, Jamie, with the fact in mind that this has been a build-up for him, this isn't a one-off result. This is something a lot of us saw coming, certainly not under these circumstances, but it was a reality that Dominic Thiem could win a slam in 2020. Do you put an asterisk next to this result?
The short answer is yes. And again, that's not to take away from Dominic Thiem. And again, you and I went into this in great length on the mini break. But look, it's important to mention the context that's going on with this U.S. Open. I think it's irresponsible to just say, hey, yeah, Dominic Thiem won this first slam. Wasn't that great? You don't mention the fact that you have a ton of top players not playing. You don't mention the fact that Djokovic goes out the way it does and all the surrounding circumstances. And it doesn't take away from his title, because at the end of the day, he's a Grand Slam champion. He's somebody who, as you mentioned, asserted himself as a top player. He's been at the top of the game for years now. He's made other routes, but didn't it feel like he just really needed to overcome one of the big 3 to cement himself here? And I'm not saying that's necessarily a requirement, because listen, at the end of the day, he didn't control that. He got in the draw and he worked through it as you're supposed to. So again, he's the champion no matter what. It just feels weird to mention this result, even in the future, without talking about what was really going on during it.
That's fair. And had Thiem beaten Nadal and Djokovic at that Australian Open, he beat Nadal, had Djokovic on the brink. That would have felt like a crowning moment. Had Medvedev beaten Nadal in that U.S. Open final, I agree, that would have felt like a crowning moment, and that would have been beautiful poetry. But we all know that's just sometimes not how tennis works. And again, a point I'm repeating from the podcast. For Dominic Thiem, the way to erase any doubt, just win a second major. No one's going to talk about how you won the first one when he wins a second one. And I know we both think he's very capable of winning a second one. Again, to keep this short, some people call it an asterisk. I call it context. Whenever we talk about the 2020 U.S. Open, we'll talk about everything that was involved in it, dating from the pair 11 through Djokovic's defaulting through ultimately that 5-set final we saw. But I say no. I say this was a long time coming. I say we knew Dominic Thiem could win a slam in 2020, that he did it in this fashion. Not how any of us would have scripted it, but not something that should surprise any of us. And, you know, when you look at the quality of play, Jamie, again, he was just the guy throughout this event who continued to find that next level, that higher level in a match when it mattered most. What did you think? You know, it was a funky final, but the quality of play in this event?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because my answer is probably much more positive if I'm not taking this final into consideration, because I was really happy with the level. Especially what Thiem displayed in that semifinal win over Daniil Medvedev was phenomenal. And so I think obviously you try and expect that from the champion to move to the semis to finals to sustain that level or even perhaps get a bit better to take the title home. Funny enough, that's not how it happened. Zverev showed some great flashes at the beginning of this, as we already touched on. So the level of play in this match in particular, it was a little disappointing. But overall, at this tournament, I think was phenomenal. The first huge tournament back after this coronavirus hiatus. Really good to see a lot of players finding, just solid form. And it bodes well for the rest of the season, regardless of what happens now.
It feels very 2008 to 2010-ish, where you have a bunch of young players. At that time, it was the Djokovic's, the Murrays, the Del Potros, the Monfils. Right now, it's the Zverevs, the Medvedevs, the De Minaurs, the FAs, the Shapovalovs, who are all working their way, who are all trying to figure out, okay, this is the player I need to become to have success at the highest level. And I think that's what we saw at this U.S. Open. And again, what you have to remember, you need to be patient, because what 2008, 2009, 2010 led to was 2011, 12, and 13, where you have the big four all relatively near their respective primes, and that was probably the best 3-year tennis stretch in men's tennis history. I think we're on the precipice of that. That's why I continue to be so excited about this next-gen crew, because there are so many really talented players. But yeah, they're definitely still trying to figure it out, and it was probably better for them. Can you imagine Thiem goes down 2-0? Zverev probably gets over the hump, right, if there's fans. It was in these finals, in these apprehensive moments, they were both 3 sets and 5 sets respectively, that I felt the absence of fans most. But overall, I thought this was a spectacular U.S. Open. Yeah,
really glad that we got, we were treated to have this sort of tennis. Really quickly to address that, I don't know if fans necessarily, it's hard to know what exactly would happen. A lot of times when somebody gets down, it's actually the fans pulling somebody back into a match, so perhaps they would have helped Thiem there. But regardless, it went down how it went down, right? And it was a tight 7-6 to win this thing in the 5th.
Yeah, it was an exciting match to end an exciting tournament. And of course, again, we will talk about this event with more depth on our various podcasts, the Mini Break, the Great Shot podcast. So be sure to go check those out. Jamie, any final thoughts on this event?
No, really, just for me, I'm really excited to see who carries momentum from this tournament into the next, into this clay court swing and the French Open. I'd love to see some of these big names, perhaps somebody who got knocked out a little earlier, like a Tsitsipas, do really well on the clay and, have an exciting run to the French. But really, it's just up to us to sit back and watch what happens.
Yes, no answer. Does Thiem win the French?
No.
I love it. We will explore that more further. Again, you can find all of our content by going to our website, crackedrackets.com. But with that in mind, for my wonderful co-host, Jamie McDonald, for all of us here at Cracked Rackets, we hope you enjoyed the U.S. Open. We thank you for sticking around and watching it with us, and we will talk to you all soon. Take care, everyone.